Okay, Phil Simborg here with Stick, and I am calling on Stick to help me out with this one. I was giving a lesson the other day on whether or not you're too good to double and how to tell, and this was a sample position, and frankly, I had a little bit of problem with this one myself, so I want to be sure that I can be a good teacher, and what I do is I go out, I call my partners. Usually I call on Stick, John O'Hagan, Perry, and David Rockwell, and sometimes I get help from a few other giants and experts. But when I want to give a good lesson on something, I better take a good one myself. So, Stick, why don't you tell me how I can determine whether or not this is too good?
All right. So for most too good decisions that come up, you're going to want to look at a few different things. First, you're going to want to look at the score. Here we're just at a normal score with a centered cube, and we want to look at the score because we want to know what the gammon value is. At certain scores, especially with turned cubes, there's going to be a higher gammon value, which will push you a little more towards playing on, obviously, than if it was a normal gammon value or lower gammon value. Here it's just centered, so we have a normal gammon value we don't need to look at. Another thing we want to note of is, just get a good feel for how many gammons are in the position. Obviously, if you're playing a position where there's very few gammons, you're not going to take much risk to go after those gammons. You're going to want to cash the position instead of taking any real risk. The position we're looking at here, hopefully you can tell that, hey, there might be some real gammons worth going after in this position. So it's worth considering a little further. Another thing we want to look at is what they call market gainers. I think that's the accepted term. Basically, that's your role and the opponent's role, where you go from losing the pass you had, assuming, if you're assuming you're playing on, they probably have a pass right now. And over the next sequence, you've either lost the pass, in other words, it's probably going to be a double take, or you've even lost the cube because you had a big swingy sequences. Those are the things you want to look out for. When you're playing out two good positions, you want to generally play more cautiously so that you don't lose the ability to cash and just take your 1 point. So you got to be careful what sequences could be big swings here, and that'll come up as an issue with this particular position, how you play some of the rolls. So when you look at this position, some of the things you should be, should go through all the numbers just in your head to see how all the numbers play. The opponent has a 4-point board over on the other side, but it's not the neatest 4-point board in the world. If you're considering how to play some of your rolls, for example, you might throw something not so great here, like a 2-1, and you should consider up front, are you going to play this 2-1 by hitting 10-7, or are you going to play this 2-1 by just playing safe and making the 9-point? And that's going to depend on how many return shots they're going to be. They're going to be 6 here, and that's also going to depend on how strong this board is. And here, again, it's a 4-point board, but there are holes in it. So if you hit and are hit back in that situation, it's not like the game's over. It's not like they're getting cubed out. There's still a lot of life after death in those situations, so it's probably worth hitting loose in this particular position. I would go through all the rolls for red, which I've already done, see how they all play. I could play them all safe if I like. I can play a lot of them, hitting loose or just hitting loose and picking up where I get that guy. So there's no real risk for red here of getting pushed out of the game through the next sequence. The worst thing is it could be hit loose with a 2-1 and then get hit back. And again, there's still a lot of life after that. Other than that, red's going to play everything safe or hitting that checker. And then with the big racing lead red has, there's just virtually no way, no matter what blue rolls next turn, that he's going to have a take, assuming he doesn't hit back in that rare instance.
So you're saying if red rolls a number that doesn't hit,
yeah.
and blue rolls double sixes, he still doesn't have a take.
There he could, but again, that's the rarest scenario in the world. I'm not worried about we don't hit, which is, a third of the numbers, and then he rolls his absolute best number, and then we've still got like a, six-pip racing lead, and he's got just an okay holding game at that point. I mean, it's such a rare occurrence, it wouldn't be my worries. What would be my worry is we roll something that doesn't hit, and then he rolls a 6. That's a lot more likely to happen, and I need to know if when that version happens, because that can happen a lot of different ways. You can roll a lot of different 6s. Is that a pass? And I'm sure all those are still passes. So since I know all those are still passes, I'm not worried so much about playing on here. He just, again, the only instances I feel like he can not be doubled out next turn or us not be too good next turn is the rare instance where we have to leave the blot there and he hits from the bar, which is just, with very few numbers, or what you just mentioned, we missed the blot completely and he rolled us several sixes.
So his market gainers, by your definition, are only when you hit and he hits back, and then you dance or come in without hitting. In that sequence, if you were to double, he would have a take probably, and that's a market gainer.
Yeah.
That's not too many rolls. First of all, there aren't that many rolls where you're going to be forced to hit and leave it. You mentioned 2-1, probably something like 6-3 and 5-4. There's a few other rolls that I counted in my head. I think there are 5 of them where you can't pick and pass, where you'd end up leaving a shot here. So if you leave a shot 5 times and he hits it back only 6 times, that's still pretty much of a long shot. And even when that happens, you might come in with a 2 or a 4 and hit one of these guys or do something great anyway.
Yeah.
So it looks like that makes it pretty easy that this would be too good.
Should be, yes.
Should be. Okay, so let's see. By the way, Skip, you skipped over one thing, and I know it's my fault because we talked about it before we went on the air with this. But the first step really is still to use Woolsey's Law. Ask yourself if your opponent's going to take or drop. There are a few situations in scores where he has a take where you still could be too good at some unusual scores where there's lots of gammons, and that's a possibility. But at normal scores, the first step is he taking or dropping? Because if he's taking, then it's pretty hard to be too good. And if you're not quite sure if he's going to take or drop, then it's, again, pretty hard to be too good. So it's when you're pretty sure that it's right for him to drop that you start looking at market gainers and whether or not you have much to lose by playing on. So one of the things, and again, I learned this in another lesson that you and I gave some time back, the determination that lots of people think you use to determine whether something's too good or not is if the gammon value is 0.5, you have to win twice as many games as the number of twice as many gammons as the number of games you might lose. But that's not really true at all, because you could only win just a few gammons, and still, if you have almost no risk or no market gainers, you can still play on even if there are not that many gammons. So now let's see what the little friend here has to say. It is too good, and this indicates these numbers sort of get shifted around. A lot of people don't know where to find it. But if you were to double here, you'd be making a 0.066 error. And again, as you can see, the number of times that you get gammons is not twice as much as the number of times you lose. You would have to have 34 gammons if you use that old formula, and it certainly does not apply here because you're clearly too good. Now, one of the ways to really understand this position is to change it. And when I made my first change to this position, the first thing I asked myself is what happens when you put these checkers back here and keep everything else the same? And what's the difference in putting it back here? Well, I see 2 things that scare me a little bit. Number one is there are more numbers that force you to hit loose and leave the shot here if you play it that way from here. If you choose to play that way, like, for example, if you have a 3-2 and you choose to hit, there are a lot more than the 5 numbers. And secondly, if you don't hit and he rolls a 6, this is a much tougher position to bring it home from. So I thought that it's possible that this might change and not still be too good. What do you think, Stick, and what do you think is the reason why it would or would not change?
I don't think it's going to change it much, just because even though there may be a couple more numbers that hit loose, you showed before that it's a rarity. We throw something where we have to hit loose, and then he has to hit back. It was under, I think, a game on average last time, so it's not going to amount to much of anything here. There's still plenty of numbers that hit, and the rest of the numbers are still going to play safe, and his board is still a little bit holy. It's not a good enough board to be that scared of, just to not play on and see what happens. Getting back to one thing you said just a minute ago, since we didn't cover whether it was a take or drop to begin with, that's always also a good place to start, because if you look at a position like this, hopefully you look at this and you're like, well, if I'm red and I double here, there is just absolutely no way blue can take. You know right away it's a drop. So if you know it's a drop right away, try to stop yourself and make sure, well, if it's such a clear drop, if the cube's not even going to hit the table and the opponent's writing the score down, you really want to give it to some consideration that it might be too good. Because if there's just no way anyone can take this, then give it a lot more thought before. I feel like a lot of people have a good sequence. They realize, they turn things around. They've got a great position. They just cube without thinking about it because they're so strong. And then they go and make that, 0.07 error or whatever when they were actually too good, but just because they didn't think about it.
Yeah, and another thing to add to what Stick was saying, if you're asking yourself if he's taking or dropping and you're not quite sure, you just sort of think it's a drop. If you're not quite sure, usually in those circumstances, it's pretty hard to be too good if you think it might even be close to a take.
Yeah.
Unless you're way off in your assessment of the position, but all you can do is with your own assessment of the position and go with it. Okay, so you're saying this isn't much different, and let's say, and you're absolutely right, it's almost exactly the same. It's about a point difference. It's still too good. So again, the next thing I did to change the position was to give blue a really great board. Now, with a really great board, I could really see a difference between this and this, because if you do get hit back, now you're dead. There is no life after death. You're going to be doubled out right away, unless he just rolls some crashing number when he hits back, which is pretty rare. So there I see a real difference where this is a lot safer than this, and I'm not sure about the too good here. How do I analyze this?
In the same way, that one of the both big things that we changed here, obviously, are his board strength. When the opponent's board gets to be, that 6 through the 3 points, the best 4 points, I just start to get scared in general. So when you made it even stronger than that, which we have here, when I went through all of Red's numbers the first time, I noticed I could basically play them all safe if I wanted to. I didn't want to the first time because there wasn't much risk involved. So now, for example, with a 2-1, I know I would be scared to death, and I would just make the 9 point. I wouldn't hit because, hitting and then a 6 at a time, I'm going to lose the game right away. And in fact, I'm probably not even going to lose a game right away by getting cubed out. He'll probably hit back and maybe have him play on himself at that point. So I would just play safe with something like that. Changing the race, being such a close race now is also going to make it harder on us, because if we don't hit now and he pops out with a 6, now suddenly he probably has a game and a take in, most of those situations because there's barely a racing lead. But there's still very little risk involved. Another thing that's kind of hard to, without more examples, to get a grip on is it doesn't always matter if the situation like this turns from, if we are actually too good here, and then he turns it around, we don't hit, he rolls a 6, and all of a sudden we're in a holding game that's a really strong holding game, but it's still a take. If the subsequent cube is a very efficient cube, we don't really care about that either. Because an efficient cube is a cube like you won the point, or whether they took or dropped, it doesn't really matter that much. So it wasn't that big of a swing. We just don't want the huge swings where we went from having a cash to either not having a double or having a double that's a really huge take. So I still feel like there's very little risk involved here, because I would play safe on those numbers where you could hit loose on the bar and leave those shots. And then generally I'm going to have a cube, if not right away when he doesn't roll a 6, maybe a roll or 2 down the line if he doesn't get that other blot out of there, or I still have a racing lead to fall back on.
Okay, so I can see why this is still too good, and you're right. It's not quite as much too good because of exactly what you said. And now if you rolled a 2-1, you're saying you wouldn't hit loose, you'd make the 9 point. And again, we should always test these things, because Stick, I think 4 years ago you did miss one position that I asked you about. So ever since then I've been testing you, but I don't take your word for it, because I found out that you're human, and so I don't take it for granted. But look, it's right. With the closed board with a 2-1, you're not going to hit loose. And again, going back to a position where his board's not so good, something like this, with a 2-1, you're going to hit loose. And it's pretty big. So Stick's analysis is right. So if you don't have a single roll that leaves a shot, and you have many rolls that pick and pass or make the bar point, so that you're not at any risk, and you can double them out next time if he escapes this check or rolls a 6. However, this still scares me more, because now what scares me about this, I know I can play a 2-1 here. I know I can play a 3-2 here. I don't have to hit loose. I know I can play these rolls safely. 4-1 picks and passes. 5-4 makes the point. What scares me is the numbers that don't hit, and now he rolls a 6. I'm afraid I would really have some trouble bringing this home. Is this still too good, and how would you know? Am I wrong to be that scared of this position?
No, it's getting tougher. Again, it's getting tougher because we've lost more pips in the race. So now if we don't roll a number that hits and he does pop out with a 6, it's certainly much worse for us. And it's also much worse for us in the sense that we might have to clear those points immediately when he's only able to break, down into a 5-point board. If we miss hitting, he rolls a 6 and then just cracks his board a little, and then we have another awkward number to play pretty soon. Our points are further away from home, so we risk leaving a shot more often too. So yeah, it's definitely gotten worse.
So I was right to be a little scared about this one.
Yeah, I would still play on. It's probably going to be close, but I'm a big fan of playing on in close situations.
And you're right. It's close and right to play on.
Yeah.
And absolutely very close. And of course, this is actually a better position for blue, isn't it?
I don't know. Why is that?
Well, he loses in the race, but he still cashes, but he's not going to crash. His board can't crash as much.
Well, he loses in the race, but losing in the race also should cause him to lose more gammons also because he needs it to crossovers.
I see 2 more jokers outside.
I don't know. It might be better because he doesn't crash. I mean, the crossovers aren't a big deal, and he's anchored for the rest of it. It's hard for me to tell whether that's better for blue or not.
Let's find out. I mean, every time I give a lesson, I learn something. So that's the nice thing about giving that. Yeah, look, it changed. Instead of being too good by .013, now it's right to double by .029. So it changed about 4%.
Yeah.
And this is better for him.
Yeah. That must be in those situations, where red doesn't hit and he rolls the 6. Now he can hang on to his board a lot more.
I can't emphasize enough that one of the very first things Stick said, always look at the score. And in fact, I don't even wait till I get to one of these positions to look at the score. At the beginning of every single game, I know my opponent's take point gammon values and my own, and I know what my basic cube strategy is, because that could affect your first roll. So wait, when you get to this point, you should already know this. But if you're looking at a test position like this, of course, look at the score first. And how is the score affected? Well, let me give you a really good example. This is not too good to double. It would be a mistake to double. But at 3-away, the gammon value is much higher than it is at 11-away with the cube unturned. If you win a gammon here, you get to Crawford. And I must tell you, I have to admit, I don't exactly know what the gammon value is at 3-away. I can stop and figure it out or remember it. But one thing, just as a rule of thumb, I know that anytime a gammon gets me to Crawford, the gammon's going to be worth more. And anytime the gammon gets me to an exact win, the gammon's going to be worth more. So as a rule of thumb, I know that if a gammon gets me to Crawford, usually the gammon's going to be worth something around 0.7 or 0.8 in that range. Now, to be truthful, if I stop and think about it, I know the gammon value here is about 0.76. But if you're not sure, you can check it. Cube information, cube on 1, gammon value. There it is, 7.6. I'm not a genius. I just looked this up enough to remember it. But I must say, at first glance, I sort of forgot how to think about it. So if the gammon value is 0.76 with the cube unturned, you have a much bigger reason to play on than when you turn the cube, because if you turn the cube, even if you were at a score where you would take the 3-away, the gammon value goes down to 0.5. Gammon value can actually go down when you turn the cube. So you need to learn these gammon values, where they come from, what they are, and then how to apply it over the board. So my guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, or let's see what the Extreme Gammon says, my guess is now it's going to be just a little too good to double because of the increased gammon value.
Yeah, it should be.
You and Stick agrees. So either we're both idiots or we're both geniuses. Let's find out. And we were right. It went from being about a 2% error to it swung about 6% to being too good because the gammon value is higher. So you have to look at all of these things. It's not just a simple, are the gammons twice as much as the wins? Look at this. Gammons and wins are almost the same amount, yet it's very right to play on. So forget that old theory. Look at market gainers and look at gammons and look at your risks. And not just market gainers. What are the risks of losing from here? I don't see any way to lose from here that much. I mean, very hard to lose from here after the roll. Of course, look, you can still lose this game 20% of the time. But on the next roll, I don't see anything that's really dangerous and many ways to get gammons. Now, I also have a reference position. I know that if I bring all my checkers around, and he has 2 checkers on the ace point, gammons are around 15%, as long as he doesn't have a whole bunch of checkers outside. And I know one more checker back in my reference position puts the gammons to 35%. So knowing that from my reference positions is why I know it's so big to hit this third checker. It gives me 20% more gammons. So that's a real major factor in helping me play on. That's why these reference positions are so important. Stick, anything to add?
I just want to make it clear in case it's not clear to anyone out there. Phil's right that you don't need the 2-to-1 gammon trade-off in most positions. It hardly ever matters. I learned that along the way in the beginning too, and then I came to realize I don't know why anyone ever teaches that. It's a very rare position where that matters because you're really weighing the risk of playing on right now versus cashing next turn or cashing the turn after that. And those numbers that Phil had up there that you were looking at, those are cubeless numbers when the guy wins 19%. He's not going to win 19% because a lot of the time you're in the actual game because you can turn the cube whenever you want in the game. So that's if it's the game's played out. So those numbers aren't exactly what happens in the game. It's just if the game is completely played out.
And here's a good example. Your gammons are actually less than the number of games you're going to lose. But there's no way to lose on this roll. So you'd have no reason not to play on. You're too good. What happens now if red rolls double sixes and blue dances, and then red rolls double fives and blue dances again? You can't lose this game. Now, if red bears off badly and you get to a position where you could leave a shot because you get awkward, then you can still always double them out or assess it at that point. So here's a situation where gammons are less than the losses that you lose. This really illustrates the point to me quite well. Stick, thanks for your time. Thanks for serving the USBGF and continuing to serve us well with your ideas and your support. And thank you all for watching. And let me stop the tape now.